Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. I wasn't really intending to do a new episode, but this evening I was really harassed, basically. My daughter woke up, came to wake me up as I was trying to fall asleep. I have a runny nose, then I have thoughts that are sticking in my head that I cannot let go of. And so, for some reason, I just felt okay. Maybe it's time to give in to all of these signs and do the fourth episode. And in this episode, I'm going to concentrate on this aspect of the Ascension because everybody's talking about it, of course. Everybody's talking about the energies and plenty of other things and moving to fourth dimension, five dimension, whatever. And I don't know why. I have this urge that I feel that all of these things need to be clarified some more. So if you didn't see my video entitled The Ultimate Guide to Ascension 3D to 5D, I really, really, really encourage you to watch it. Just pause this video and come back to it later because I'm going to do a lot of shortcuts here, which you might feel uncomfortable with if you don't listen to that video first. So basically, the idea is that what's happening to humanity is the same as the birth process, where a baby, which is composed of individual cells, moves from the womb, which from the point of view of its cells is the only reality they know, to the outside world, which is like going into another dimension. And so each individual cells is like an individual human, and the baby is basically our collective consciousness. Which was kind of asleep or in a semi-sleep and will become fully active once outside, and we will of course feel the effect. So that's the 1 minute summary of the way that I sort of explain this whole process. But I guess the urge that I felt to sort of clarify all this is to say that this is right now is a very crucial time, because it's a little bit more important than just the birth of a baby, because of course thousands and thousands of babies are born every day in our world, and it's a normal process. But what's happening to us, and many channelers say that, is that this is unique, or that this is the first time that something like this has ever happened in the story of the universe. And to a certain extent, I would agree with this, and which is why this kind of way of explaining it falls short of the whole complexity of what's really happening to us. So in another video, which I also encourage you to watch, of course, because I build on ideas as I go, the fractal universe, which is one of my first videos, which is really essential to understand the broader functioning of the universe, is that this concept of fractals is how infinity, or God, or source, sort of experiences itself. So it starts with an idea, and then it expresses that idea in all of the different possible variations and forms to sort of understand that idea to the utmost, and that experimentation then tweaks the idea in turn. So, for instance, the way that I explain it is that from the idea of a star, you can experiment all of the different solar systems that can exist. all of the different solar systems can experience themselves from the idea of a star, and pure energy just sort of, it's almost as if it's molded through that idea of the star, and then on the other side it manifests as all of the different solar systems and galaxies. And that experiment, that way that experimentation then feeds back into the idea of the star to tweak it and make sure that the story, the experiment, goes further and further in exploring infinity. That's the whole idea of the universe. That's how the universe functions. And so you can think of the future here is basically tweaking the past, when it's not really the past. It's just a sort of a bridge, or a bridge between different dimensions, you could say. Where in the lower dimension here is just a bunch of hydrogen atoms bouncing around and hitting each other. And once they go through that portal or that idea, they're molded into a star, and they can start experimenting, doing things infinitely more complex, like associating in a certain way, like the atoms, the protons, electrons, and neutrons, associating in certain ways that can create helium, lithium, and all of the other oxygen, all of the other elements, and then experiment. And so it's as if the laws of physics are being tweaked as the laws of chemistry emerge, in order for those two to be sort of optimally aligned and compatible. And so what's happening to us now is it's as if the laws of biology are being tweaked in order for us to sort of then manifest all of the different possible things that are basically all of the things that are possible from humanity behaving like one collective global organism. And I've said that basically this is all of the ET races. All of the ET races are like a fractal variation from the moment that humanity starts behaving like a global organism. And there are an infinite number of timelines that get to that bridge between the third dimension, what I call the third dimension, and the fourth. And then the fifth dimension is even above that. The fifth dimension is when these ET races themselves become conscious that they are a part of, also a part of a larger organism, and linked together. And you hear this story of the Galactic Alliance, or whatever. I don't even know what, but basically once all of the different ET races, which are also just a fractal variation of the fact that humanity can behave like one global organism, understand that they are also, each one of them, as like one neuron, so to speak, in a brain of a even higher consciousness, of the collective consciousness, not of humanity this time, but of all the ET races in the universe, that also forms a collective consciousness. That collective consciousness is in fifth dimension. And so forth into infinity. So you could say that this is like nested brains, one inside the other, or nested consciousnesses, one inside the other. So as you see, it's a bit more complex than just a regular kind of birth. And the reason why there are so many different versions of what's going to happen to us is that, quite frankly, we don't know. Right now, it's as if this idea, this bridge, is actually becoming clearer as we are getting closer to it, but it's not going to become perfectly clear until we actually reach it. And as you can tell from all of the people channeling information, we are getting information from all kinds of ET races, all kinds of channelers, all kinds of ascended masters, angels, whatever, which are in higher dimensions, which are trying to make us aligned with, making us compatible with this main idea. and not sort of fall short. Because if we're not balanced, if we're not like exactly in the middle, exactly aligned, then part of these stories will not exist. And that's not what infinity wants. Infinity wants to explore everything that's possible. And so this whole birth process, it's still a mystery as to how it's actually going to manifest. And here is one very controversial thing which many people will hate me for. But this idea of an instantaneous ascension to the fifth dimension, I think this is, how should I say this? It's like these kind of sticky papers that you put for luring in flies, so that they sort of set themselves on there. I think it's kind of similar, because here's one thing that I really don't that I really want to insist on, is that someone has to build the bridges that you want to cross. So if there's a bridge between the third and the fourth dimension, and you want to cross it in order to experience the fourth dimension, somebody has to build that bridge. And then in the fourth dimension, it's almost as if you were here, say this is the Middle Ages, and this is the 21st century. Since time doesn't exist, if you're a peasant in the Middle Ages, you have your little fork and whatever, and you're tired of your existence, you're really fed up, and you want out, well, somebody here, because time does not exist, and somebody here that has mastered time and is outside of time, or that is in a higher dimension, can say, you're tired, no problem. All you need to do is just shift your consciousness, and you can instantly just pop into existence in whatever future that is aligned with what you want to experience. Why not? It's perfectly possible. Since time doesn't exist, why would you not be able to just teleport yourself in the future or in the past or wherever you want to, and experiment whatever the hell you want to experiment? Fine. But the fact that you can experience yourself in the 21st century means that there is an unbroken chain of events that go all the way, that lead all the way up to you, with people struggling, having children, and them having children, and them having children, and this incremental progress, this incremental change that allows for this reality to be sort of attached in one way or another to infinity. In my other videos, I'm saying that the problem with infinity is that any point in time is linked infinitely to a number of infinite pasts and leads to an infinite number of futures. And if you don't have the illusion that it's one specific past which leads you to that point, you have no idea where to go into the future, and so you can't experiment yourself. Which means that this limitation, I really like the channelings of Bashar, by the way. You can check him out. Bashar often says that we're the masters of limitation. Masters of limitation. And he's absolutely correct in that. But that is the only way that infinity can actually explore itself. And the reason why civilizations like that of Bashar can experience themselves at that higher level of consciousness is because there is a story in infinity which starts again from nothing and then creates some past that leads all the way up to a civilization where he can transcend those limitations and sort of consciously manipulate the past that leads to whatever eternal present he's in, so that he can experience whatever future which becomes his new eternal present. Inside all that is, inside infinity. Again, this is a brainstorm, so sorry if this is all, if there's a lot of things to digest here. So where am I getting to here? Is that I'm wondering if many of these 5D channelers are not just trying to lure in people that in the 21st century are tired of building this bridge, this progressive bridge here between third dimensions and fourth dimension, and gradually gain the understanding and the technology and all of the things that raises our consciousness progressively, and just want to sort of serve as a marker for identifying those humans that are tired and just don't want to contribute to that kind of building of the bridge, and just want to jump straight forward to the end of the movie, so to speak, and see the roll of the credits and then move on to something else. Maybe building the bridge between fourth and fifth dimension, that bridge. So, and this may sound like I'm being critical or I'm being judgmental, but it's absolutely not the case. It's just that the universe, and this is already how it's happening, sort of sorts you automatically based on your level of consciousness and who you are. Because you cannot lie to yourself. You cannot lie to yourself. You cannot lie to the universe about who you are and what your level of consciousness is and what you want, what your desires are, what your deepest desires are. And if your deepest desires are, fuck this whole stage of humanity, this is all terrible, this world is horrible, and there's just too many violence and whatever, and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. Well, the universe has an exit plan for you, and you can very well then kind of quote unquote die in 3D and be born in 4D or 5D or whatever, and continue with your journey in that sense. But this gradual transformation and modification of our DNA and becoming sort of superhuman or whatever is not something, I don't think that's something that's going to happen overnight. I think if you listen to some of Cryon's channeling, which I also really like, in one of his channelings he uses a term to coin this kind of building of this bridge, and he says it has an acronym that people will remember, which is why I'm telling you now, because I obviously remember. It's called SUCK. The abbreviation is Slow Uncomfortable Change. And that is what this building process of the bridge between the third and the fourth dimension is all about. And along the different markers here on the bridge, the different stages of construction, you have among them, for instance, quantum physics, which, you know, going deeper into understanding of quantum physics helps us understand all of these things that I'm explaining from a more esoteric perspective, and then some technology that puts those ideas into practice and slowly changes the kind of world that we're living in, but certainly not this kind of grandiose event where there's just a big flash of light and then we're all in paradise the next day. Of course, that may be the case for those that have chosen to, that have the deepest desire and that are tired of building that bridge, that just want to quit on this reality. Well, the universe is not going to contradict them. It's not going to tell them, no, you're going to stay in 3D and suffer the shit out of, your life, and I don't care what you want, and blah, blah, blah. No, of course not. The universe always accommodates itself to fit your deepest desires and deliver them to you. So some people may experience it as a flash where they disappear from this dimension and reappear in another. And that's totally fine. I mean, if you want to skip ahead of the story, that's totally fine. it's almost like people that just can't watch, for instance, something like, let's take a series like Game of Thrones, and they can't stand looking at the drama, and they just want to look at the end and see how it finishes and then move on from there. And they can do that if they want to. And that's what this whole let's go directly to 5D kind of means. In my understanding, what I think 5D is all about from my perspective and building that bridge is that 5D is simply our GPS, our way to find our way to building that bridge in the correct way. But still having it being incremental and not just jump to 5D. Somebody has to build that bridge for the energy to be able to sort of, move along that bridge, and then for that 5D reality to sort of experience itself from that point on. Without time, if you want. And of course, sending information into the past so that we build that bridge in the correct manner, so to speak. And correct is not the right term. It's more this process where the laws of physics are what they are because they allowed the laws of chemistry to emerge. The laws of chemistry are what they are because they allow the laws of biology to emerge. The laws of biology are what they are because they allow for humanoid, self-aware humans, self-aware creatures to emerge. And whatever society or rules that will apply to us for us to interact in a harmonious way will be what they will be because they will enable to build on top of it an infinite number of layers of nested consciousnesses into infinity. This is one layer of consciousness which is perfectly aligned with this one, which is perfectly aligned with this one, which is perfectly aligned with this one. And we are kind of teetering, going this way, that way, aligning progressively to sort of be square in the middle, find the perfect balance, and then from that another infinite number of parallel realities can experience themselves. As a friendly reminder. So let's go back to this birth metaphor, because maybe we can go a little bit further into, and I'm going to try now to give an actual practical form to all of what is going to happen from my point of view, from this understanding of us as the bridge builders between 3D and 4D, and doing this very progressively. Just to give you, for instance, let's just dive into this. So, I've said that the placenta are kind of the people that will stay on old Earth, and that the baby is us moving to new Earth. But new Earth, which is just slight variation of the old Earth, but still looking very much the same in a way. I mean, a baby is still very much the same as its mother. It's a mini human, a mini replica, so to speak, of the mother. And so it's not really different. It's just, once it's outside, it witnesses a different kind of world. But once it's outside, first, the 5 senses of the baby are still very limited once it's outside the body. I mean, it can't really see very well until like 1 month or even more after it's born, which on a time scale which is equivalent to how long we've been in Mother Earth's womb, would mean a few thousand years. Like, for instance, if we're 25,000 years in Gaia's womb, which is one of these cosmic cycles, galactic cycles, and a baby is 9 months in the womb, this would mean that we'll really start to see accurately. So you can say that our third eye will be fully open in as from the point of view of our collective consciousness, don't forget, in what, like three or 4,000 years, from our point of view, from our linear 3D experience, so to speak, and that's a long time. So the baby also hears new things, and even the way that the baby moves, okay, it can move more freely than when it's inside the womb, but it's still quite limited in its movements, which means that we will be sort of exploring, we'll gain new technologies to be able to explore the solar system, then the galaxy, but it will also come in incrementally. And of course, time accelerates. I mean, we've heard about this acceleration of time and the fact that things manifest faster and faster, which is true. So using these time scales actually may not be accurate because it's more of a kind of a parabolic function. So, what takes 1,000 years here takes only a few decades here. But still, it's incremental. It's incremental because a bridge needs to be built. You cannot just skip ahead and say, whoop, we'll skip all of that part where we actually manifest or experience or do things that justify whatever it is that is here to exist or experience itself. Can't really do that. I mean, you can, but somebody had to do it. Somebody had to stay behind, so to speak, and do the actual exercise of building that for you to experience that in the future. And you're free to jump there if you want, but again, somebody has to stay behind to build that bridge. Placenta, the elites, the corrupted politicians, the fossil fuels, the placenta, which of course the umbilical cord, and feeds the fossil fuels of Mother Earth to humanity. So what can happen is the baby can have the umbilical cord rolled around its neck, which, as Mother Earth pushes the baby out, can actually feel like suffocating. And it really sounds like that's what's happening with the elites. It almost seems like we're being suffocated, in terms of the financial system, squeezing, or the poverty sort of, the levels of poverty mounting, levels of inequality mounting, not having access to finance, which is kind of our oxygen on the scale of humanity. So oxygen for cells, money for humans. It does seem like we're being suffocated, but again, it's just one of the things that can happen during the birth process. Now let's deep dive a bit into the future, the financial system of the future. Once the placenta and the umbilical cord are cut, then the baby sort of, its heart and its circulatory system is not dependent anymore on the circulatory system of the mother and the placenta, which is, the placenta is like the only way to get nutrients is via the placenta. It has to go through there. And once that cord is cut, then the baby has to be self-sufficient. So the financial system of the future, no surprise, I guess. It's no wonder that we have blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. And that people are saying this is the future of money or whatever. But do you really think that it's going to be Bitcoin? Of course not. Bitcoin is based on scarcity. Bitcoin is a limited few number of people that would accumulate a lot of Bitcoin and then would be the serfs, and the masters of all those that didn't acquire Bitcoin, and they have to go knock at the door of Mr. I thought of Bitcoin first and I bought some Bitcoin first, and ask them, can I polish your shoes or give you a foot massage, and you can give me 0.000000001 Bitcoin in exchange so I can buy from you whatever goods that you own, and just keep everybody under control. So it's not going to be Bitcoin, but Bitcoin, because people still think in terms of greed and accumulation, is the best way to market or sell the idea of crypto and blockchain to the entire population, because we're still in this capitalist sort of individualistic mindset where we're trying to accumulate and get the most for ourselves. Then Bitcoin is the best way to sort of push these ideas and this technology to the mainstream. If blockchain and crypto had started with a sort of voluntarily adopted universal basic income currency, then nobody would have heard about it. Simply because, people would have thought about this as being utopia or silly. Whereas thanks to Bitcoin, the technology, the underlying technology, which enables a sort of a universal basic income to be implemented without having to go through the current financial system, without having to convince any kind of elites to implement this system, without Bitcoin, this technology would have never made it into the ears and minds of millions and millions and millions of people. So ultimately what will happen is this financial system, we're going to transition from the current financial system to one where we have a universal basic income. But it won't be based on taxation, and it won't be based on monetary policy within the system. What I think will happen is somehow, because the shocks can come from anywhere at this point, the banks will fail. And what the banks have done is that they have taken control over the payments system, which is the money in your bank account. So the money in your bank account is basically just a line of code in a database. And the banks have taken control of that database. And if the banks go down, the database goes down with them. They take your deposits sort of with them. And they say, well, we can't transfer those $1,000 that you own because we're bankrupt. And so the states then come in and have to save the banks. What will happen this time, in my mind, is that banks will fail, the financial system will fail, and the states, in sheer panic, the central banks will just take over all of the servers and all the data of the payments account and centralize it and make sure that people can transfer their money again. Let the banks fail. And then a new financial system will be able to emerge from whatever state of the deposits at a certain point in time. But from that point in time, people or the central banks will be able to add money to the account of people daily. So let's say that each day you get plus $10 to spend in the economy. Each day, every single human gets $10 to spend. And so money then becomes a voting mechanism for deciding what is important, what should get produced in the economy. Because you can see that your $10 bill, it's not just money. Whenever you're spending your money, you're sending a signal into the market saying, this is what is important, this is what should get produced. And in the current system, because banks decide who to lend money to, and the ultra-rich invest their money in one place and not another, they have a disproportionate influence on what gets produced, what the economy looks like. In that kind of system, everybody initially has the same right and the same amount of money to vote every day on what they think is important. It's like a permanent crowdfunding, where everybody has the same voting power on what's important, what should get produced, and what the economy should look like. And then after you've spent the $10, of course, some people will be rich, some people will be sort of poorer because they've spent the $10 and they've done nothing, or they haven't managed to present something to society which society thinks is valuable. But those that are rich, they are rich because they provide something that people thinks that everybody thinks has value. Everybody agrees that it has value. So if people think that T-shirts produced by Bangladeshi children on the other side of the world in horrible conditions is valuable, then they can use that $10 that they receive every day to purchase those T-shirts. If, on the other hand, people think that it's quality, fair trade, sustainable, whatever T-shirts being produced, then whoever produces those T-shirts is going to be rich. And because everybody has the same initial amount of votes, you cannot say that you don't have this kind of how should I say, distortion, where by squeezing your income, you're almost forced to think in a logic of greed, of buying what's cheapest. And you can start thinking in terms of long term. And so it starts with the financial system, because, as I like to call it, the financial system is the circulatory system and the heart of our collective organism. So if it doesn't function correctly, then none of it functions correctly. And you can see that what I've just described is the exact way that your body works. Every time you inhale oxygen, each one of your red blood cells receives the same amount of oxygen. It doesn't receive one of the oxygen cells, one of the red blood cells doesn't carry $10,000 or $1 million or $1 billion, and the other red blood cells carry $1. They all get the same initial amount of oxygen. And then they circulate through the body, and they dispatch it according to the need. So when you run, the oxygen is concentrated into your legs. When you think, the oxygen is concentrated into your head. And this happens seamlessly. You don't have to think about it. It just does. It just happens. And the system that I've described here to you is also in that way. Everybody gets a certain amount of money to spend every day. And there's this kind of wisdom of the crowd effect, which can happen, whereby the sum total of each individual decision of buying whatever something creates a coherent whole where society can transition, make the energy transition to something cleaner, make the food transition to planting, more sustainable foods. All of this is made possible thanks to distributing this voting power. And you see, this is much more democratic than what you hear sometimes in spiritual communities, where it's like, we have to do something, or we have to do this or that. This is more like each and every single, you see, there's nobody on top here, and each and every single one person reclaims their sovereignty of deciding what they think is important according to their values. and then the world that you'll get to experience will be the sum total of each individual decision, but where no single person, controls the outcome. And that's really important, because right now it's a few select people that control the outcome. And again, it's kind of normal, because again, we are still, the placenta and the umbilical cord are still dictating what we get to experience, because they are the only way that we get access to resources. But once we're outside of the womb and we start breathing on our own as a collective organism, all of that relationship changes and we can transition to something else. Now, I said that the central banks will take over the deposits, but then gradually that centralized database can be sort of converted into a blockchain and a cryptocurrency. Why? Because as soon as you have a centralized control over something, there's a temptation to take control over it. So there's a temptation for a certain little group of people to take control of it, whereas decentralized public blockchains cannot be taken control of. And so we'll transition from a centralized system of payments and accounts controlled by a certain number of centralized organizations and institutions to a decentralized records of payment, but where each and every single person has access to that currency, and not one where it's all based on scarcity and this race of accumulation. And then, of course, some people will get rich, some people will get poor, but there'll be a sort of a cap on how rich you can get, because your relative share of wealth gets diluted in new money created all the time. And then there'll be a sort of a floor on poverty below which you cannot fall, because, of course, you are entitled to getting a certain minimum every day. And it's the same for your cells. Your body feeds every single one of your cells, regardless if one cell is kind of dicking around for the moment, doing nothing much. Who knows what that cell is going to do in the future? Maybe that cell is going to mutate and be the key to protect you from a virus that is still unknown. And this is the wisdom of the body, is that it doesn't consider a single one of your cells as being expendable. And it sort of nourishes each and every one of them, because it doesn't know which one will come of use or will do something in the future that might be useful to the body. So that's for the financial system. Of course, politics and the way we're going to make decisions will have to be changed. And so, just to cut the story short, because it's already a long video. Oh my God, 43 minutes. Who's going to watch this? So, instead of having this one chamber in Parliament, we're going to have two chambers. One where it's elections, probably as usual, and one where it's election by sorting. Sorting means that it's picking citizens at random. And so what you'll get is a perfect sort of a representation, a snapshot of any given society reflected in that chamber, in the Parliament. So you will have, of course, parity instead in terms of men, women. You won't have this problem of having only white males being elected. You will have a correct representation of socioeconomic class, where typically the politicians elected are rich. And there's almost no teachers, no factory workers in people being elected. And so it's almost as if each and every decision is submitted to a mini referendum. And so it's not about getting rid of the corrupt politicians. It's not about going for direct democracy or whatever. It's just this kind of new balancing between the old and the new. Or, and both chambers, of course, have to agree on any kind of decision. And so you finally have citizens that are sort of a way of controlling basically what happens in politics, and the political party sort of distortions that happen on what happen on politics and decisions that are made. Of course, this will also create some new effects, which is there'll be an even bigger incentive to educate people. Because if potentially any citizen can be randomly chosen to govern on your behalf the society or your country for the next 4 or 5 years, then it is in your best interest that every single citizen is properly educated and responsible and all those things. And it was the same thing in the 19th century when we went from a democracy where only the rich could vote to one where a universal democracy where it was one man, one vote, instead of like having a weighting system where a weighing system where the rich vote counted for a lot more. The argument was, oh my God, in the 19th century, many people were still illiterate. And, the people that were scaremongering in those times, those that were in control, were saying, well, if we open democracy to this universal principle where it's one man, one vote, and since most people are illiterate, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be the end of our civilization. I mean, it's just going to be idiots that are going to vote for other idiots, and that'll get reach power and then wreak havoc. Of course, you didn't have to wait for illiterate people for chaos to set in, but it's the same kind of process here. That gave the impetus for mandatory schooling and a huge wave of making sure that people could read and write in order to be able to manipulate them in more subtle ways than the ways that illiterate people were manipulated back in the days, which was, and if you read that, it's really funny, but back in the days, for instance, you had priests that would take their whole sort of community to vote, and they would tell them how to vote. And then, of course, also men told women how to vote and all these things, and then gradually we're sort of reclaiming our individual sovereignty over making decisions. And now this is, of course, all of the things that I'm describing is incremental change. Building the bridge between the third and the fourth dimension in an incremental, progressive way. And of course, somebody that wants to jump ahead will not see any of this. And maybe all of this that I'm describing is just my understanding, of course, so don't take it as the ultimate truth. It's just my own perspective based on the understanding that I have on this whole process of how infinity sort of experiences itself. They would be able to jump to a future where, for instance, there is no parliament, and there is no money, and people can manifest things with their thoughts instead of, having to wait for machines to produce it for them or whatever. So that's that. How about transportation? Well, we are definitely in a sort of a transportation crisis where more and more people have personal vehicles which sit idle 95% of the time, and there's a lot of fossil fuels and this dirty kind of energy that is being consumed. And if we move away from fossil fuels, well, how is that going to work? I mean, if, for instance, the placenta and the umbilical cord gradually, there is this technique where you can keep it attached and you let it dry out progressively. If that happens, then we'll have less and less fossil fuels, and we'll have to replace that with new and new energy. So how is that transition? Again, incremental change. How is that transition going to happen? In my mind, what's going to happen is the car is going to go from a personal item to a service. And this is already happening, of course. I mean, if you look at Tesla or Uber, what they're trying to do is to create a fleet of self-driving cars which will pick you up and drop you off wherever you want to go. And of course, if you have a fleet of self-driving cars, then you can cut the amount of cars that are on the road now by over 70% or something close to that. Because an algorithm can optimize, for instance, if people have to go to work and commute, it can optimize picking up people along the road to whatever city you are, with the buildings and ever, and just pick people along the road that are going to the same place and make sure that your trip is optimal and fastest. And so instead of having one person in one car on the highway creating traffic jams, you can have 5 people in one car that are being picked up at strategic places along the way and that go work in around the same kind of area. And since it drops them off directly in front of their workplace, it doesn't have to park, so you also save time in that way. And so all of this can be seamless. Of course, I'd prefer to have this a at least semi-public service where individual people can equip their cars with open source self-driving software and hardware, and then rent out their personal vehicle to a semi-public service and get some money out of it, and then create this fleet of self-driving cars and not having to rely on, again, monopolies. Because monopolies and centralized controls is a thing of the past. The future is more decentralized. Decisions and ownership and everything, but which creates a sort of coherent whole, just like your body functions. And so basically, this algorithm will know exactly the individual needs of each human for your transportation needs, and it will make sure that you get a car within 5 or 10 minutes if you just want to go somewhere on a whim, or instantaneously if you book, like, I don't know, an hour in advance or something. And so no more parking places. You don't need parkings. These self-driving cars can drive themselves to huge parking spaces in airports or train stations where they can sit and recharge during the night and be taken care of. And then at 5 in the morning, they can sort of go and start driving people around. There's so much to say. Of course, transportation and delivery will be paired together, which means that this fleet of self-driving cars can also pick up any kind of good somewhere in a shop and then deliver it somewhere else, also based on an optimal algorithm. And so it'll be integrated with the postal service and parcel delivery service in general. And that way you'll also save a lot of back and forth, and especially you will prevent this kind of centralized hardware warehouses, huge warehouses of the likes of Amazon, and the terrible working conditions and everything that you've heard of. That's the way of the past. If you have a fleet of self-driving cars, then they can pick up any good that you want at the local little store with the local little shop owner that does his own thing and has his own little boutique. And then, he just gets a notification on his smartphone saying in 1 hour, please be outside. A car is going to pick up this one item that has just been bought in your store. What else is there to say? Telecoms. Everybody's hearing about 5G and the dangers of 5G. Indeed, we'll get rid of 5G. What we're going to do instead is invest heavily in mesh networking. What is mesh networking? Mesh networking is devices connecting directly one to the other instead of going through a cell tower and then going back to another phone. Again, centralized control of communications. Whereas mesh networking, you can have a complex mesh of individual devices that are connected one to each other and communicate directly to one another and create a sort of a complex network. And for self-driving cars, for instance, this is invaluable. You can have a self-driving car that is connected to all cars within a 200-meter radius, for instance, that give them instantaneously and without having to go through a centralized network or service their relative position, so they can adjust or prevent accidents and all that stuff. And this is also how we're going to utilize to the utmost the current technologies like 4G, like Wi-Fi. Instead of having, for instance, one person in one area that is not using their phone, that is getting full signal 4G, but it's sitting in their pocket, and somebody 2 or 3 miles on the somewhere else where 4G doesn't reach, having 2G connection and trying to stream a video. Well, you'll have a complex mesh of phones that are interconnected, where if one phone doesn't need connection, it can still receive information and transmit to other phones that need information at that time. And so you'll have an optimal use and dissemination of information across a complex network, which will also be resilient, because even if you sever certain connections, there are an infinite number of possible sort of connections possible with all the different devices that are inside a mesh network. I'm not going to go in technical details, of course. All of this is stuff that I've learned gradually, and the reason why I know them, of course, is because, well, I'm explaining it to you. So I guess the universe didn't sort of make me interested in these different technologies for no reason. If you know something, it's usually for a reason. And here, I think the reason why I'm so geeky and I know about all of these different things is because it's all part of a whole. And again, decentralization and the stop having centralized control, where everything has to go through the telecoms, and if they go down, then communications are severed. You also have, for instance, multicast technology for disseminating information across the internet, which is much more efficient in terms of data transfer than the current unicast. And I'm not going to go into detail explaining how that works, because I don't understand it fully, but I know that this, again, is much harder to control and monitor. Basically, who emits a signal, who receives a signal, this one is perfect for control. which is why this one is not the future. And of course, there's also the issue of energy production, and this is also going to change. We're probably going to discover 0-point energy and all kinds of other kinds of technologies, which allows for the creation of clean energy. And that's going to be a smooth transition and slow and gradual transition from fossil fuels to this, as the placenta and the umbilical cord dries out and the baby catches his first breath. But again, it's going to be decentralized. And we see it with current technology such as solar panels or wind farms, which can be on a much smaller scale, instead of these huge mega projects, which are again in the control of huge corporations. And so it's again going to be this decentralization logic and resilience, and the fact that you never depend on one huge nuclear power plant which concentrates everything in one spot. So I hope that this video was useful in understanding that all of this. Well, basically, don't expect change. Expect change. Of course, there's going to be change, but don't expect it to be quote unquote magic. It's going to be magic when you're in 30 years and you look at the progress that has been achieved. You look back, it will appear magic to your, if you put yourself in the shoes of your younger self, quote unquote. So we are being transformed, we are changing, and the changes will be reflected outside. And of course, our biology and our bodies will be adjusted. All of this is going to change, of course. But again, we are here in the business of building this bridge and reaching a point where we start acting like one global collective organism is what triggers all of the changes. It's not the other way around. It's not the change that sort of transforms us into a global organism. No, we start acting like a global organism, because that's how the third dimension works. So first you act on something, and then you see the results. So first we act like a global organism, and then everything else will fall into place. And all of the things that I've discussed right now are things that are not woo-woo, they're not abstract, they are not in this kind of abstract lingo of the spiritual, but if you look at the ultimate implications of how all of these things work, they do represent kind of this bridge between today's world, where everything seems so centralized, so full of control, so outside of our influence, to a world where we reclaim our sovereignty, and at the same time we can start act like a global organism, because we've sort of removed the chains of control that were holding us back. Which again, I don't see them as evil, because the placenta and the umbilical cord serve a purpose so long as you're in the womb. But once you're outside, then things need to change, of course. And this is what we're doing now. So yes, we are going to evolve, but just look at any baby as they grow. It's quite amazing the progress that they do, but it's progressive. It's not this quantum leap into the unknown. We've chosen to do this because somebody has to build the bridges you want to cross. That's how infinity explores itself. It needs a sort of one linear experience to get to somewhere for it to experience then 5 dimensions, 7 dimensions, whatever, from that point on. It needs some stream that goes from nothingness to everything. I hope you found this video interesting. Feel free to comment or ask questions. I don't know when the next one will be, obviously. I've covered a lot of things in here. And we'll see. I mean, I'll just let this flow naturally.